Welcome everybody. Hello friends, my name is Jason Imms. I am the Senior Quality Assurance Manager at Live Tiles. I'm also the host of the Game Hugs podcast, which you should all totally subscribe to right now. That's the only time I'm going to forgive you for using your phones during this talk. And my pronouns are he, him. Today I'm going to be talking to you about developing great quality assurance practices in small teams, which is something that I've got quite a lot of experience with, but it's not really what I'm doing right at the moment. I started at Live Tiles a bit over a month ago, working out of the Hobart office. Live Tiles makes enterprise IT software, primarily for large-scale corporate clients. We make what we call intelligent workplace software. It's very exciting. That can do everything from allowing customers to set up their own intranets without relying on the expertise of a bunch of consultants, cleverly managing staff contacts and personnel profiles, and custom-designed chatbots to automate and simplify common tasks. We do a bunch of other stuff too. But suffice to say, we're not a small team. We're 150, 60, 70, I don't know, I've only been there a little while, people around the world. And we don't make video games. What we do though is we solve problems, we design amazing solutions, we deliver releases at a very fast rate, and we do all that with an extremely high expectation of quality because our clients spend lots of money with us. But I think a lot of that might sound a bit familiar to the games experience. There are similar pressures to making games for a hungry audience. So essentially our clients and the people that make the financial decisions at Live Tiles understand that quality is a really important part of what makes our products worth paying for. And that's why they put me on, to manage all of that stuff, and why we're looking to increase our QA headcount over the coming weeks and months, both primarily in Hobart and in New York. Now when it comes to games, I think this idea is something that most people here can feel is familiar and would agree with, that quality is important. But not everyone can afford to spend money, and I mean proper money, on doing quality assurance as well as they might like. And frankly, nor do I think many Australian game developers have a real idea of what it actually costs to do quality really well. I don't say that to disparage or belittle. The Australian games industry has rebuilt itself from the rubble of the 2010 crash, and it's relatively fresh-faced, and supplementary procedures and services that are generally built in later in a industry's life cycle. So it isn't a surprise at all. It's for the most part it is built on small passion-driven studios that by necessity contain a small number of often overworked and multi-skilled people working together through thick and thin to get a game over the line. And there just isn't much room for juniors or specialists in that context. That's just a reality. Or expert contractors. There's not an insignificant amount of privilege that comes from simply being a studio that has cash flow enough to be able to outsource services. I understand that. And so I want you to know that I mean it when I say that I'm not going to spend an hour up here describing a bunch of QA processes that are out of reach for most studios, processes that would often require a full-time staff member or contractor to manage. Instead, we're going to be looking at practical solutions and skipping a bunch of slides. Woo! Give me one sec. Instead, we're going to be looking at practical solutions and bare minimums that you should be doing, that you can do, as well as giving you some pointers to improve the common things that you might already be doing but could perhaps do a bit better. I should note here that if I use any terms that feel unfamiliar or that don't sit with your understanding of what they may mean in your context, please do ask me to clarify. Raise your hand and say, please define that term you just used. QA nomenclature is messy and not even close to centrally defined. So throughout, please do raise your hand. That's totally fine. We've got a lot to get through today though, so let's not get derailed into questions now or about talking about words, although I would really enjoy that actually. We can talk about that in the hall later. All right, let's briefly look at my history in QA so you can be confident I know what the heck I'm talking about. I've worked in software QA for a decade and a half now. I started out as a part-time junior software tester for a Tasmanian dev house while I studied computer science at UTAS. Mostly worked on smaller local government projects at that place. From there, I moved on to between a handful of similar jobs at similar companies, gaining experience and perspective by working with various clients and project types. As I gained that experience, I was given more and more responsibility until I was leading QA teams on multi-million-dollar government and private sector contracts, until one day a massive project I was working on with the New South Wales State Government Department, that I probably shouldn't name here because I think this is being recorded, They pulled the project, and our entire team was made redundant, which hurt. But that was when my hard work really paid off. I was contacted a couple of days later and brought in to interview for a job at a very large company and was hired to build its QA capacity from the ground up. I was employing and training new staff to work with me. I designed processes to serve our internal business units and also our clients, and ultimately created a QA practice that I was really extremely proud of. So obviously I quit and became a games journalist. That story's pretty long and irrelevant to what we're talking about today, but it did introduce me to the games industry pretty quick, and it helped me to build a really valuable network, and eventually led to me starting my own games-focused QA consultancy, The Machine QA. The Machine was my baby. We built it to help Australian studios confidently make their best games, and I think that we can boast for many of our clients we did exactly that. Now I'm speaking in the past tense here because we shut down The Machine painfully recently. It was an amazing ride. We worked on some titles that I'm still pinching myself about. We helped League of Geeks make its first move into mobile with our Mellow and established some great new procedures for their internal QA team. We worked closely with Love Shack Entertainment and Horse-Drawn Games to bring the Framed collection to Switch. I even had the privilege of working with Clay Entertainment on Mark of the Ninja Remastered for Switch, alongside the excellent Plastic Fern Studios. I also consulted to a bunch of other studios on building QA processes that will serve them long into the future, even though we weren't directly working on projects. I had a huge amount of fun, we did some amazing work, but it couldn't last. A whole bunch of factors contributed to the shutdown, including some really nasty external circumstances that we just had zero control over. But at the end of the day, my business partners and I came to the conclusion that we couldn't sustain The Machine with the rate of work that we're able to win from the Australian games industry, and at the rates that they could afford to pay in 2018. It's a reality that one of the walls that we've built for ourselves is a seemingly willful blindness to what it actually costs to make games to market, to be members of an industry. We can't afford and often lowball our contractors. We don't pay our staff enough, we don't pay ourselves enough, and we can't afford to take the time to make the games in the ways that we'd really like to make them. And we often can't afford to proactively train and accredit and strengthen our teams beyond what they learn from experience on the job or from events like this one. So, in that spirit, the rest of this talk is going to be, as I said, a bunch of practical tips that you can implement in your teams as is to make QA and testing work on a budget that will scale with you and will support your growth as you go. By the way, this amazing animation was made by Rex Smeal. He's awesome. You should look him up because he does lots of excellent things like this. All right, so what's QA? It is more than just testing, but it includes testing. QA is a much bigger field, and I found in my journey that, I was quite startled to find in my journey that games people and private sector IT companies use those terms very differently. Games QA is generally assumed to just be, we've got test cases to run and we run them every day and we do regressions, primarily focused on that testing effort, whereas private sector IT talks about a lot of other things, such as process planning, control and maintenance. So we define a bunch of processes, we manage them and we maintain them and make them better over time and shave off the edges. We find bugs, it's a pretty important part of it. We review design artifacts. So design artifacts are basically anything that we can refer to that can act as a source of truth for us when we're designing test cases. So raise your hand in the room right now if you're making a game based off a game design document. A large number of you. Now, please lower your hand. Keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. Please lower your hand if you haven't updated that document to reflect changes that have happened over the life of the project. That's a pretty startling number of people. You are unicorns. Find these people and work with them. They're doing some good stuff because it's very rare. We also design and write and evaluate test cases. So that means we spend a concerted amount of time and effort developing test cases, which are scripts that we run to make sure a game does what it's supposed to do based off those documents. So they're very, very important to us. And we evaluate our exit criteria, which is basically just a term that means making sure that we can say that a game does all the things that it's supposed to do, so that we can sign off on it and push it forward to the next milestone. All right, so this is the dry part, if it wasn't already too boring. These are the 7 QA fundamentals. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, and then we'll get on to some more practical stuff for you. But this stuff's actually really foundational and very important. All right, so testing only shows the presence of defects. Testing reveals that bugs exist and have been observed, but cannot unequivocally prove that there are no defects remaining. It can never say for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that all of the bugs have been found. Our work is essentially never done, which is a little grueling. Exhaustive testing is impossible. So for a complex system, it is just impossible, or at least extremely unlikely that you can afford it, possible to test every single test scenario, every combination of inputs and preconditions, just due to the sheer number of tests that would require. And no one can. If you think about the difference in need for testing a mobile game you made at a game jam, you just want to get it out, your testing on that is going to be relatively small. But if you compare that to, say, what NASA do when they're testing for what their software team do, that their testing is just a completely different scale. But even they would say that they don't exhaustively test something. The concept of defect clustering. Defects tend to occur in the most complex areas of a system and at the boundaries of those areas. So by analysing that system, whether it's a game or anything else, we can identify the areas most likely to produce defects based on experience with similar systems, or through discussions with developers of that system under test. We can focus our testing on those areas. So have a think about the games that you're working on right now. Don't call out your answers, just think internally. Which aspects of your games are you least confident in? Which parts did you rush? Which of your components within your game have lots of moving parts and interactions with external systems? And you should point your testers at those as a high priority. Early testing means to provide the greatest benefit. Testing should begin as early as possible within a game's life cycle. The earlier defects are found in the production pipeline, the cheaper and easier they are to resolve. But we don't even have a build yet, they tell me when I say I want to start looking at things now. And I can hear some of you silently screaming it at me. QA analysts can and should look over design artifacts, scripts, and any other assets you have to help you identify issues really early. When I say it's cheaper and easier to fix a bug early, what I mean is if you compare fixing a bug in a live multiplayer title, your game's out, it's in the public's hands, they're playing it, and the bug's been identified. It's probably annoyed some people. They've raised the bug through your support channels. That bug comes in, your support people are looking at it and spending time analysing it and triaging it. And then they agree that it's a bug, and they feed that information back to the customer and say, thank you, we'll work on it and get back to you. Then they handball that over to the dev team, and they do their research and investigations, and they finally find the fix, and they spend the hours that it takes to implement that fix. Then that's got to go to testing, and the QA team's got to make sure that fix hasn't broken all the other things in the game. And then eventually, you can make sure that it's stable enough to push back out into the public again. Alternatively, you can hand us your design document. We can say, well, if you do X and Y, then Z will happen, and that's less than ideal. Your fix for that is changing a Word document. It's a pretty quick and easy task. You can also use some form of the agile methodology within the development environment that can help you with this as you build momentum and build towards your minimum viable product. And you can get that out for testing quickly, which means I've got eyes involved in the entire iterative process. If none of that made any sense, go look up Agile. I won't bother defining it all here. Good luck, though, because it's a messy conversation, Agile. The pesticide paradox. Test cases don't last forever. Over time, repeating the same tests will result in finding fewer and fewer defects, making those tests less economical to run over time. Which is which is where the name comes from, much like spraying a crop of fruit over and over, you'll kill fewer bugs each time because there simply aren't as many left. And at some point that becomes wasteful. So to overcome this, tests should be revised and maintained regularly to ensure that they continue to provide benefit. And not just maintained, but often removed completely and replaced with different tests. So that's an ongoing process. It's not something you do at the beginning, do your testing at the end and hand it off. There's work for QA people to do throughout. Testing is context dependent. Every product is different, therefore the testing effort should be adapted to suit the needs of the project. For example, Test processes used for a niche, as I said before, test processes used for a niche mobile game will differ to a large-scale game made in a AAA studio with real-time multiplayer or something. They're also quite dependent on the context of the project itself, its budget, time frame, people and stakeholders. Often through the machine, the work that we did wasn't the development of detailed test cases that we run through regularly and reliably. It was about identifying how many hours we had in our pocket to spend and how best to use those hours. And so we would reduce test depth to allow us to get more time across the application. So we're focusing on a broad testing effort rather than a deep testing effort. As I say, every project's different, and context is very important. You can't use the same methodology every single time. And it is something you need to design and plan for, because when people don't, it becomes an afterthought or not done at all and is left up to your paying customers to do for you. The absence of error fallacy. If you've executed your testing and found no bugs, again, this is kind of related to some of the previous points, it doesn't mean that bugs don't exist. It's important to design tests that understand how your players will play your game. As well, it's all well and good to run tests designed to make sure that each of your systems do everything they're supposed to do. And that's quite logical, right? If you think about our game is broken up into 15 different systems. I've designed tests for each of those systems. They've all been executed. They all passed. 100% test complete. We're done. Great. High fives. But that's just not how it works. If you don't test for how users might interact with those systems in ways you don't expect, or cause those systems to interact with each other, issues can compound, and you're very likely leaving pretty scary and dangerous bugs on the table. All right, those are the 7 fundamentals. If people have questions about those, we can come back at the end and have a chat. All right, practical stuff. Track your issues and tasks, please. Get issue and task tracking software and do it as early as you can in your project. And if you think you can get away without it, you are kidding yourself. Issue tracking tools like Trello, Asana, Jira, Visual Studio, if you have stupid money, do make it possible to track, assign and bind tasks and bugs and issues to workflows. They get you out of your heads and your notebooks and into a centrally managed and transparent system that everyone can contribute to. They make you bus-proof, which means if you're a senior dev and you have everything you need to do in your head and you're tracking along really well and you're very efficient and you've got some notes in your notebook that are written in your handwriting, and then you get hit by a bus, people can't pull out those ideas from your head and probably can't read your handwriting. They couldn't read mine. Whereas if it's in a system, at least they might not be someone else picking up those tasks might not be as fast or efficient as you, but at least they're there and at least the work can continue if you get sick or something like that happens. They generate huge amounts of data that you can use to analyze your performance and make changes in the future. They help you keep track of your capacity and will give you an early warning that you need to get more people tomorrow before you needed them yesterday. I personally highly recommend Atlassian Jira. You should absolutely check it out, but I can hear the sound of eyes rolling from here. Trust me, it's pretty good. It by default is a bit of a nightmare. I understand that, and that's often people's discussion around Jira. I'm not related to them at all, by the way. I get no kickbacks, so do what you like. But often they give it a try in its default state during the trial period, and then bounce off it because it's a bit too big or a bit too slow or whatever. But the beauty of Jira is that it's highly customizable, and most of the other tools that I mentioned before are not. So something like Trello and Asana are great, but you really don't have much control over which fields are tracked on your issues, which fields are surfaced in forms for creating new ones. Whereas in Jira, you can create completely separate forms for creating bugs, completely separate forms for creating bugs internally versus externally for users, and for all the other task types you might maintain. And that has a very, very powerful workflow engine as well, so you can have different workflows for different projects and different issue types. Makes it an absolute pain to administer for anyone who's had to do it, but the actual day-to-day use of it once that's all set up is fantastic. But I cannot stress this enough, you need issue tracking software. Cool, extra transition. Good QA is expensive, cheap QA isn't good. I'm not going to waste too much time here. Good QA is expensive, cheap QA is not good. but please remember, I don't have my own competing company anymore, so I have no skin in the game here. This is just my observations. It seems pretty common for Australian studios to expect amazing results from their low-cost test providers, internationally or not. Cheap external QA does have a place. If it's filling in to cover staffing gaps or during times of high pressure, you can augment your internal QA teams that way, or add an internal QA that way if you want to. But if you try and offload all of your QA effort onto a low-cost external, often offshore team, you're unlikely to ultimately save that much money compared to using a more expensive expert contractor. Cheaper providers are often checkbox tickers. They expect you to design and develop all of the test cases yourselves, which is half the work, more than half the work, and they just kind of run through them, and they tick them or put crosses next to them and give you the results at the end of the day. Some are better than others. Many of them absolutely fall into this category. And then they just kind of leave you to fend for yourselves. They're focused on getting paid for as little work as possible because, frankly, they're not charging enough to be able to do it better. I'm sure they're quite capable, but they need to live. And you do get what you pay for. All right, kicking off the QA process. We'll talk through a generic scenario now and make the rest of the talk less about dry theory and more about what you can practically do well. So, let's say you've been making a game for a couple of years and you're well on your way toward release. Suddenly it occurs that you should probably start at this point thinking about quality assurance, beyond asking your colleagues and other developers to look at their own work before they check it in. So, where do you begin? You need to build time into your schedule for testing. If you don't have any QA people on staff, you need to identify a QA champion, someone to own the process, because process is half the work, as I mentioned before. Your first instinct will be to point your finger at your producer, because they just ooze process, right? No, your producer's probably already quite overworked, and they've got enough process-related things to do. So I would suggest that it's probably a bit too risky to do that, and it's probably a recipe for it getting pushed to the side, or at least reduced to something very small. Instead, pick someone like a comms person or a junior if you've got some budget to put a junior on, and give them something that they can have some agency over, something to build responsibility on and kickstart some initiative for them. If you don't already have QA and task tracking software internal to the business, it'll be their job then, this champion, to get it all set up and get it all maintained and customized. And you need to also make that stuff mandatory for all team members. Next, that person will start asking Hegelian questions. If you're not already neck deep in the project, you can ask as many questions as you can until you have a deep understanding of what the game is today. This is more important for someone coming on late, but it's an important task. Questions are a huge part of performing QA tasks. You can immediately start comparing what it looks like today to how it was presented in its probably aged design document. Use the devs, but never trust them. I don't mean that to be as harsh as it sounds, but it's a fun headline. So go to your developers and start peppering them with questions. But you have to take what they say with a grain of salt. It's a simple matter of being too close to the title. The developers are neck deep in the code. They've seen all these issues before. They're used to looking through bugs that exist. And QA is a big part of QA is the idea of independence, having some fresh eyes, separate eyes who are outside the development process, who don't look at the code at all. They look at the product. The developers made the thing. They know it too intimately. So strangers are good. You can ask questions like, where are the most complex parts of the game? Which parts of the game are you least confident in? Which parts do you think your users will love or your users will hate? What do priority and severity, as fields on a logged issue or a bug, look like to you for this project? There are so many questions you can ask, but you should start asking them and you'll come up with more as you go. These are just something to kick it off. All right, the source of truth. A source of truth is an incredibly important document. It's the tool you need to be able to state with certainty that something is a bug, as opposed to a request for a new feature or a cool new idea. So your source of truth is a game design document and any of those design artifacts I mentioned earlier. Your source of truth sets expectations. When you pass a test case, you're basically saying that the system met your expectations. You break that down into the test case level. So for example, you could have a test that says when a player gets to level 20 and makes it to the Cherry Bridge region, they should be able to access the PvP arena. Not that any of you are making MMOs, I hope, because that would be crazy. The test case then breaks that idea, that overarching objective, down into steps. So player achieves level 20. Our expected result is that they get a big reward. There's some effects on the screen, and there's a 2-0 above their character portrait now. Player navigates to Cherry Bridge successfully. Player is prompted on arrival in Cherry Bridge to check out the arena. Player navigates to the arena. Player is met by an NPC that walks them through joining a match, and the player is able to successfully join and complete, win or lose, a PvP arena match in Cherry Bridge. All that information was defined in the game design document, which means that if the game deviates at all on any of those points, the test fails, and we can raise a bug, fully confident in the righteous and pleasurable indignation that we feel when we write up a bug. And this is key. If you don't have a source of truth, if you don't have any relevant design artifacts that we can reference when we're writing tests, then you don't have a basis for those tests, and that means you become the source of truth. It means we have to ask you even more questions. It means you have to drop tools, which is never great for a developer who's in the zone. You have to drop tools and answer questions so that we can do our job, otherwise you become the roadblock. And that's, in my experience, not generally welcomed. So having it written down is really, really valuable. Next, a test skeleton. This is really important. So a test skeleton is a series of test cases that haven't been detailed down to that level of the prescriptive steps that I just described before. A test skeleton describes a test objective and the expected result at a very high level. So using that example before, players at level 20 should be able to access and make use of the Cherry Bridge arena. And you can intuit from that a bunch of things. If you're familiar with a project, you probably have a feel for some of those things that were listed in the steps before. But if someone's new, why is this making noise? It's driving me crazy. If someone's new to the project, then they can't necessarily intuit that stuff. If they're new to MMOs, they can't intuit that stuff in this example. So they need to ask all those questions before. But, as far as a test skeleton is concerned, that high-level objective is enough. That is a test. There's no need to flesh it out more now. There's no flesh on those bones at this stage. It will do for now. It can be detailed later, or most likely left as is until the heat death of the universe. But as written, it's an executable test for any tester familiar enough with the game to decipher. And there is the downside with skeleton-only tests. They require testers that know the system, so it becomes very difficult to bring new people in and have them be effective. And that doesn't feel great for those new people, and then they will burn out and bounce off and all the rest of it. So there is risk involved in using skeletons only. But if your team is small and only planning to stay small and everyone's familiar, then you can get away with just doing test skeletons. That's totally fine. So at least do that. At least write down what your objectives are for each of your tests. Take the time. Don't just hope. Don't just think, if I spend 3 hours testing today, then that'll do. You need to have a plan for what you're going to do and when. And the skeleton can help you with that. Next, you need to schedule testing time for everyone. Once you've decided on your tests, it's time to schedule. If you don't have dedicated testers on the team, then it's essential to schedule testing time for everyone. Don't make it one or two people's responsibility only. Share the load and share that experience around. You can make it social and fun. You can block out some time during the week and say, this is our testing time. We're all going to drop tools and we're going to do testing together. Get some pizzas in if you can afford it. And in that sort of environment, people will be encouraged to talk more about their experiences and what they're finding, and to celebrate finding bugs rather than dreading it. Because remember, a bug that you found and documented is a bug that you can fix. If you haven't found it, someone will, and they'll do it later, and you'll be worse for it. So you should celebrate finding bugs. Actually, worked on a project many years ago. It was a large government project. And it had been going for quite a few years. It was a multi-million-dollar project, so large scale. And one of the client's reps walked through the office and just saw over someone's shoulder the total number of bugs on the project. Doesn't matter what status they were, just the total number. And they freaked out. They're like, it's got so many bugs. And they went back and told their boss that the software is really buggy and we're not telling them the truth in our bug reports and all of this stuff. Based on this number, they panicked because they didn't understand the bugs are a really, really positive thing. When you've logged them and found them, you can fix them. It's very important and they're very good. All right, what are bug reports? I'm just going to go through this. It's quick and dirty, but this is the key important stuff to include. Please take photos of this. It should be on every project, ideally. You've got the summary. It's the title of the bug, and it's searchable, so you have to be really clear and concise. So that means when someone does a search or a query on your database, this is the first thing they'll see. So you need to be really clear. Don't be silly with it, as tempting as it can be. Be very clear about what the bug is and as concise as possible. Because if it gets truncated, then you're losing all that in those contexts. Description, put in lots of detail. Basically anything relevant to the bug, anything you think might be relevant to the bug will go into that field. It's a bit of a catch-all. And then specifically you have a separate repro steps field. So that's a detailed, numbered set of steps that you can use to reproduce the bug. That needs to be exactingly detailed if possible, because you want to try and deliver bugs that are as close to a fixable task to developers as possible. You don't want to go, I crashed when I loaded the second level. Off you go. Go play with that for a while and see what you can do. That sucks, and I imagine you've dealt with that before, and it's not an easy thing to identify, and you'll probably just put it to the side. There might be some more. If the person who logged that bug did a little bit of work to get to the bottom of it, they might save you some time and actually get the bug fixed. Your expected result, what you thought would happen. Your actual result, what actually happened. Priority, how soon a bug should be fixed, basically. And severity, how much the bug affects the user of the system. I'm going to talk about those on the next slide, so I'll skip them for now. Affected version, which version of the game contains the bug. So that means it's really important for you to surface that information for people testing your game. Because ideally, and again I'll get to this a little later too, ideally the person who reported a bug should be the person who verifies that the bug was fixed, and that verification step is very, very important. But that's very hard to do if you don't know which version of the game the bug was found in, or which version of the game you're looking at today. So that stuff's really important to surface. Attachments, screenshots, videos, GIFs, anything related that you think might make the diagnosis process a bit shorter. All right, let's talk about priority and severity. Can you read that off the back? A little bit? All right, I'll talk through it. Priority and severity are actually extremely important to map, and intersecting that can provide you a lot of context about a bug in question. Priority is primarily concerned with how soon a bug should be considered for remediation to be fixed. It's especially important for agile methodologies, where priority will affect when a task gets added to a sprint, or whether or not it will get pushed out of a sprint when other work comes along. Severity is primarily concerned with how much the bug affects the user. And together, you get a picture of how important a bug really is, and they allow you to make smart decisions about when and how to fix them. So I've got some examples. So obviously, a 1.1, so a very high severity, high priority bug is a system crash during primary business process. And you can't work around it, nothing else can happen, it needs to be fixed immediately. The opposite end of the scale, lowest priority, lowest severity, it's a simple alignment or spelling issue. It's not really affecting anyone. It's a bit unpleasant, but it's not going to cause anyone any serious problems. But I also really like the opposite ends of this spectrum. So you can have a really high severity below priority bug. Say you've got some timed processes that go off once a year. And when they go off, the whole thing comes crashing down. But it's not going to go off for another 10 months. So we've got a little bit of time to get that one sorted out. And then the other end, very high priority, low severity. If you've got like a public-facing website or just a part of the game, a spelling mistake could turn a regular word into a curse word or something horrible like that. It's not going to crash or anything, but you should probably fix it straight away. All right. When a bug is fixed, it should be assigned back to the reporter for verification. It's incredibly important to make sure that fixes work, because they often don't. Some teams will have a ready for QA bucket in their task tracking software that fixed tasks get put into, and QA personnel simply take a look at that bucket every morning and pull tasks out before they dig into other stuff. Some just treat them like normal tasks and assign them directly to the individuals in question, asking them to put them into their personal workflows based on priority. How you handle that stuff is up to you, but getting those fixes verified is key, especially if the bug was logged by a user. Often users feel like, even if we give them a form to capture bug stuff, they might feel like it's just a bit of a black hole for problems. Hey, I found a bug, oh, tell me all about it. They spend a bunch of time explaining and reproducing and documenting and screenshot, which is work for you, and they hand it over. And then you take it away and you fix it, and you tell them you fixed it, and they check, and actually you didn't. What a disrespectful waste of my time. I will now make all my friends boycott and review bomb the studio. So it's really important that you do that verification process internally before you hand it back out. So if you've got QA personnel there, ask them to set up a verification step between you and the customer. Love and thank your community testers. It's becoming increasingly common to get player bases involved in testing games, which is great and fine, it's good. You've got exclusive closed betas, private test servers, inner circle users, early access, crowdfunding, access reward, things like that. There's lots of different ways to get your paying customers involved in your quality practices, and we have modern technology to thank for that. It's a really good thing, but it can be a bit of a blessing and a curse. You often get very low quality results and steps and details in your bug reports, and you'll end up spending quite a lot of time verifying and triaging issues raised by users. So there is a downside to it, but it's basically free labour when you think about it. They're doing a lot of work for you, so you really should love them and give them some thanks and feed them. And you can also give them some guidelines to make them feel more effective. You can give them a simple form to fill out when they raise a bug that clearly defines what you expect of them. So it's just got the fields there that you needed on the previous slide. And you can give them some testing objectives. So in a closed beta type environment where your community testers have chosen to be involved, they've opted in, you can give them some direction to test specific new features, how two systems might interact. Can you take a moment to focus on this and have a think about it, have a look at it? Because it's pretty hard to think outside the box without a box. So you've got to give them some constraints to work in to focus their testing efforts. Hi, testers. Like if you can, and I understand, as I said before, it's quite a privilege. If you can, it's really worth it. You can start them out as juniors and they can grow from there. And hopefully throughout all this, you've started to see some of the value that having internal test people can provide. And I just can't recommend it enough. Do it as soon as you can afford it. I like how I said enough said, but I'm still talking. If you've got the systems in place that I described previously, then when they come in, when you do get around to, when you are capable of hiring them, they'll be coming into a studio that understands them, cares about what they do for a living, and supports them with good processes and procedure. And that'll make them want to stay around. They want to stay with the studio, and it would encourage them to stay in testing for a much longer period of time. You want to give them a career, not a job. And that is really close to my heart because testing is a very transient workforce. It's very hard for me running a team to be able to get and keep people on my team. I spend all this time training, but often, because they're often low-rung jobs, they want to get in the door to the company by taking a testing job and then step sideways into other things, which is totally fine. I understand it. I've done it myself. But wouldn't it be great if we could build a test team of people who are experienced, know all the systems, and do stick around in it as a career? I wouldn't be so lonely. Cool. All right, that's the end. If anyone has any questions, please do feel free to raise your hand over there.
First one's a statement. You mentioned Jira as like a tool.
Mm-hmm.
Just for everyone else in the room, Plan is a free tool that is sort of between Trello and Jira. Use Trello, Jira, and Plan works best we can use. But my actual question, I'm a very small team. We've got 4 people, an artist, and 3 people that write code. The artist isn't very process driven, but I'm thinking about who would be the best person to champion QA. Would you go, without knowing anything about the team, would you go the artist or the person that writes the least code?
Good question. Neat question. So first on the Plan point, thank you for reminding me. Plan is great. The only downside to it is it doesn't give you heaps of customization options. So if you like the way it does stuff, it's a really good tool to use, and again, it is well recommended. If you need the customization, though, other tools might be better. To your question, both. Why not both? Nice thing for the artist might be if you have set up some processes, and you mentioned, I'm not saying this, that your artist isn't all that process focused. This might give them a bit of insight into how process feels, and maybe they can start mapping some of that to their work. So do that if you can. And the person who writes the least code, there's probably more risk there. As I said before, they're probably less independent than the artist because they are in the application more. So they're more likely to miss bugs. But they're also probably more likely to find the more complex ones. Your independent people will spot when things look out of place, but your technical people will spot when things feel out of place. And that's a pretty important distinction. So if you can get them both involved and everyone else in the studio, that's the best result. Any other questions? Way at the back. 15. Oh, perfect. Thank you. I just saw a hand, got very excited. Hi.
Have you had any experience, has experience with software and anything like that in programming in general had any benefit in QA and working in QA?
Could you clarify a little bit more for me?
So, for example, just working in any sort of background with sort of programming.
Oh,
like
sure.
That, has that given you any benefit into working in QA as well?
Yeah, it totally can, because you can start to, when you see a problem occur, we talk about observing a bug versus the presence of a fault. When you observe a bug, when you see it present in the running application, as I said, we want to create tasks for people to fix as quickly as possible. So if you've got a bit of a background in that stuff, you can go, pretty sure that's because of this thing that the application does, and you can write that in. But again, there's risk there, because you might be wrong, and you could be sending the person who's responsible for doing the fix off on with a red herring. Again, there's a bit of a balance there. But if you're getting everybody involved in QA, then you're going to get the best of all that, and hopefully you can over time minimise the worst of it. No worries. Hi. Hey, Callum, what's cracking?
When is it too early to bring in QA? So, for example, if you're working with a small team and you're talking about these design architects, design pillars, what if the team itself is very collaborative and a lot changes a lot, all the time, every single day? So what kind of strategies can you implement to really just like help that process along without getting too involved as well, like without becoming a part of that design process?
So for a small team, excuse me, despite saying begin early, for a small team that just might be impossible, and it might just be impractical to do that. But I also mentioned that small studios are often multi-skilled, so each individual has multiple hats, and so your QA person might also pick up some slack. If they've got some downtime, they might start helping out with other areas, which will inform the QA work when it becomes more tenable to do that. As far as processes are concerned, if everyone in the studio understands that QA is valuable when you're doing it in a static context, so when you're doing it without software, you're doing it from the documents or something else, then they'll see value in you spending time on that stuff. If they don't see value in it, then you probably just have to cut and run. You probably just have to say, okay, I understand that that isn't the best use of our time and budget resources at the moment, so how else can I be effective? And just step away. And that's a bit of a shame. And it's not a best practice, but in like a fast-paced environment, in a low-budget environment, best practice is often just getting it over the line. You've got to survive to get the game out. Next. Hi.
What sort of strategies would you have for projects that have a very short turnaround? So something like a month or a week, where user testing isn't a process that you go into a lot of depth and you've actually support to get.
Cool, very good question. I don't have a slide on that, probably should have done. Nice one. So the question there was, what would my recommendation be for testing on very short-scale projects, very short-term projects, when you may not have time to do a lot of the stuff that we just talked about, because it does cost time. Firstly, issue tracking stuff, it's really non-negotiable. If you can make the time for that, get it all set up and use it, because it's reusable across projects. But what you would do instead is something that we call exploratory functional testing. So that is to say, it's often called undirected testing, which means you don't have any tests or test cases to execute. You're just exploring and playing with it and trying to break it in as many ways as you can. Exploratory has its place. In fact, quite frankly, a lot of the work that I did over my time with the machine was exploratory testing, because those were the levels of budget that we were talking about. We just didn't have the hours to build a bunch of tests. And so what we would do is something we call a test charter. And that is to say, testers, your objective today is to look at X, Y, and Z. And you give them a document, and it says, this is your objective for today. And here's a handful of notes that might help you in your testing. And then what they do is they treat it like a journal, which was very important for me as a contractor, because it also showed my work and allowed the people who were paying me, especially as a remote person, to see that I wasn't wasting them time and money. But what they do basically is, instead of having tests that they've written up front and tell them what they're going to do, they write a journal of what they did. I looked at this, I tried that, I found a bug when this occurred, here's a link to it in whatever tool we're using, and that can then inform. Those documents live as artifacts that you can then use for future testing, as references for future testing. When you're getting to do some regression and some retesting, you might go back and pull out the charter from the last time this feature was looked at and go through that and reuse that and work around it and test some different stuff. So it's a bit more undirected, and ideally is done by more experienced testers who are more likely to know what to look for. But yeah, that's probably the best option. Does that help? Awesome. Next. Hi.
In my small company, our main form of QA is code review.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of code review compared to other things? Is it helpful?
Yeah. It's also not in my purview. So I am told Coview review is great, and sometimes can be a bit arduous, but that does fall outside what I do. My role is primarily functional testing on the application itself, and not getting involved in the code side. So it's the difference between white box testing, where you're looking at the code, and black box testing, where the code is inside a box and you don't get to look at it. You just give the application some inputs and confirm that the outputs are what you expect them to be. So I don't get involved in that side, so I don't really have an answer on that one for you. I'm sorry. Again, told that it's great though. Next. Hi, up the back there.
How do you handle testing on projects where they're a bit more secretive about it, so you can't really go to a bunch of people, can't just send builds to your friends and stuff like that?
Right. NDAs are good. So if you don't have one, go get one. Find a pro forma. There's lots on the internet. Find a lawyer. Like if you've got the budget, you can pay a lawyer to write up a template for you, and you can use that one. It can be customized for your company. I really like NDAs because it gives the developers that I'm working with a bit of freedom to talk to me freely, knowing that they can kick my ass if they need to later. An NDA stands for a non-disclosure agreement, by the way. So that can really help. But in that case, you probably still need to keep your testing within the inner circle a little bit. So again, push it back on the team if they've got the time, and do encourage them to make the time to spend their own hours doing some testing, and do bring some people into that inner circle bound by an NDA to give you a hand. It's probably the best option. Next. Hi.
Is there anything you'd recommend for card and board games?
Card and board games. Well, all the same processes apply. Again, we're not dealing with the code. So I haven't done card and board games myself, but my gut tells me that you could do a lot of this stuff anyway. So you should still have a piece of software tracking your tasks and tracking the bugs and the defects that you're finding with the card and board games over time. I can't think of anything specifically different off the top of my head. I'll think about it though. Come and grab me later and I'll give you a card, and you can pester me if I don't answer you. Yes?
So with kind of what you mentioned before about hiring QA and people having multi-interested elements,
Mm-hmm.
we're hiring at the moment to hire new QA, and I find it really difficult because a lot of the applications are like, I'm an artist, or I'm a programmer. I'm like, that's great,
Yep.
hiring QA though.
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance that when you're working on new people, whether it's for your own company or otherwise? How do you balance that to find someone, we're hiring a junior QA, someone who's going to stay in QA and stay interested in that?
Sure.
Not just try and move to something else?
Yeah. For me, a lot of it comes down to the cover letter. If your cover letter makes it pretty clear that your intention is to take a QA job and bounce off to something else, then that will probably lower you in the pool of applicants a bit. Not because that's not fair or that's not a good thing to do. Again, it's perfectly valid and a good thing to do because you need to get in the door somehow. But for you as the hirer, I'd be looking at what their intentions are. anyone who says, I'm really excited about getting into games QA, I think I can do a lot of good work there, and actually wants that for themselves, they go straight up, and then you assess them on other margins. But I think for you probably just have to embrace the fact that testing is a pretty transient workforce, and ideally have someone there who can own it, and that, as I said before, the QA champion. And if they are pretty good, then your juniors that come in and end up bouncing off to other studios or other parts of the studio, then they can just be assigned work and head out. But frankly, it's very rare to find someone who really wants to be in QA permanently, because reasons for that are it's not really taught in much detail in tertiary education around computer science or in vocational colleges. And so people don't even necessarily know or have role models that work in that space who they want to copy. So it's just hard. I'm sorry. There's not really an easy answer to that one. Just do your best with the people that you've got. Yeah. Hi.
On identifying people who have the good characteristics to be a QA, or even within your team who might be most suited to it, what characteristics would you be looking for?
They all say the same thing. I'm very analytical. I like to poke holes in things. I'm a very I can't think of the other phrase at the top of my head, but there's lots of phrases that people commonly use which kind of wash over me at this point. I'm a bit sick of hearing them. So for me, what I'm interested in is people who are very process oriented and like process, because QA is a very process related job. Even when it's exploratory, you want to build some process around it. And you want people who are really good communicators. Communication is, that should have been a slide too. Communication is a really, 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 really important part of QA. You need to be able to very clearly elucidate on what you've found and define it and make sure that there's no ambiguity. Ambiguity is really dangerous. So communication is incredibly important. And you can kind of get a feel for that in their cover letter. If their cover letter is a bit of a mess, they're probably not great communicators, because a lot of the work that you do is in written communications. And communication is probably the biggest one, so that would be what I'd focus on. Getting close to time now, thank you. Do we need to stop for like 5 minutes early? Do we need to stop on past? A little bit early? All right, we'll do one more, real quick. Hi.
Hi.
Matt, hey buddy.
Yeah, hey. So how do you separate out good bug reports from feedback?
Cool. I said a quick one, man. A good bug report is incredibly detailed and is not subjective. It can include subjective elements, but it should be primarily objective. You are telling me the facts of what you observed. You should include some subjective stuff. This is a risk because users might feel, or I felt, but ideally it should be objective first, subjective second. That's my short answer. That is the end. Thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you.